My wife Emily has always been a light in my life. She had the ability to find beauty in simple things and turn everyday moments into something unforgettable. We've been together for over a decade, and our marriage has always seemed strong, even when I was immersed in my business. But recently, something started to change, and I couldn't figure out what it was. It all started with golf. She decided to try a new hobby to occupy her time while I was working. Emily chose one of the best clubs in our city, a place that was famous not only for its golf course but also for its upscale atmosphere. I was glad that she had found something for herself, something that brought her pleasure. In the beginning, she would come home excited, telling me about the game, training, and new friends. But over time, her stories began to change. They became shorter, less emotional, and her phone suddenly became untouchable. She was staying late at the club more and more often, explaining that she had extra lessons with her coach. His name, Alex, came up in her conversations with some regularity, and it started to make me uncomfortable. She talked about him too much, about his playing technique, his sense of humor, how well he explained. I ignored these thoughts at first. I wanted to believe that it was just my imagination, that I was too tired to think rationally. But her behavior became stranger and stranger. She began to take better care of her appearance, wearing new clothes that she bought exclusively for trips to the golf club. Her perfume became brighter, and her smile became more distant. One evening, I noticed her sending a message to someone and laughing while looking at her phone screen. When I asked who it was, she brushed it off, saying it was a friend from the club. But her answers didn't convince me. My heart began to clench with anxiety that I couldn't explain. I decided to check if my suspicions were justified. The next day, when she drove to the club, I followed. Parking at a distance, I watched her enter the building. Her posture was relaxed. Her smile was sincere. She looked happy, but not because of me. When I returned home, I was overwhelmed by a feeling of emptiness. I sat in the kitchen, staring into an empty glass, and thought about how far we had come. We used to be able to talk for hours, laugh, make plans. Now there was an invisible wall between us that was getting higher and higher. The following days were a test for me. I tried not to show my emotions, to behave as usual. But anxiety was growing inside me. I began to analyze her behavior, to notice little things that I had previously ignored. Her eyes began to avoid mine. Her laughter sounded strained. I no longer knew who she was. One evening I decided to look at her phone. She had fallen asleep after another day at the club, and her phone was lying next to her on the table. I picked it up, feeling a mixed sense of guilt and determination. Her text messages with Alex confirmed my worst fears. Although they weren't overtly intimate, their messages were too warm for a normal trainer and student. They exchanged jokes, planned meetings together, and discussed things that were clearly not golf-related. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it echoing in my head. I put the phone down and went out onto the balcony. The air was cool, but I could barely feel it. All I could hear was her voice in my thoughts, her laughter, which now seemed alien to me. That night was a turning point for me. I realized that I could no longer ignore the truth. Something in our marriage was broken, and I didn't know if I could fix it. But I knew one thing. I had to find out the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. A few days passed after I opened Emily's phone and saw her text messages with Alex. Every moment since then has been filled with tension and suspicion. I try to act like I always did, but something changed inside me. I can no longer look at Emily the way I used to. Her every move, her every word seemed to be laced with lies. Emily continued her trips to the golf club, leaving the house each time with the same warm smile I had once loved so much. I saw her put on her best sportswear, how she carefully applied her makeup before going out. These were details that hadn't seemed suspicious to me before, but now I saw them as something more than just self-care. One day I decided to follow her again. It was a Saturday morning. Emily said she was going to a long practice session because the golf club had organized a competition for beginners. I knew she was planning to spend the whole day out of the house, and that gave me the opportunity to act. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed. I parked not far from the club and started watching. It had a great view of the golf course, and I could see Emily and Alex practicing together. He was showing her technique, correcting her strokes, but their movements seemed too close, too intimate. She would laugh, tossing her hair back, and he would lean closer than was necessary for training. I watched them for hours, and every minute only added to my inner despair. It was already more than just a friendship. Their interaction was filled with an energy that I no longer saw in our marriage. I sat in my car, feeling anger rising inside me, but also powerless. I didn't know how to proceed. That evening, when Emily came home, I tried to collect my thoughts. She acted as usual, but her eyes avoided mine. I couldn't stand the tension any longer, but I wasn't ready for an open confrontation either. I decided to give myself some more time to gather more evidence. Over the next few weeks, I started to proceed more cautiously. I installed an additional program on her phone that allowed me to track her location. I knew it was an invasion of her privacy, but I felt I had a right to know the truth. Every time she was at the club, I checked to see if she was really there and made sure she was driving home after training. One day, I received a message from the app that her phone was in a different location, not at home or at the club. It was the address of a hotel on the outskirts of the city. I immediately got in the car and headed there. When I arrived at the hotel, I saw her car in the parking lot. My hands were shaking with anger and fear. I didn't know what to do, but I felt I couldn't stand by any longer. I went into the hotel and approached the reception. The receptionist looked at me calmly when I asked about the room Emily was in. She said she couldn't provide that information. I tried to explain that it was my wife, but the woman remained adamant. In desperation, I decided to wait in the lobby to see if I could spot her when she came out. After a while, I saw Emily and Alex coming out of the elevator. They were laughing. Her arm was around his shoulder. I saw them walk up to the hotel door and felt anger building inside me. I followed them outside, but stopped. I wasn't ready for a confrontation right now. I decided to go back home and think about my next steps. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts revolved around what I saw. It was a betrayal. It left no room for doubt. But I also realized that I had to do more than just stay silent. I had to act, even if it meant the end of our marriage. After the night I saw Emily and Alex together in the hotel, I felt completely devastated. My marriage, which I had thought was strong, now seemed hopelessly broken. My heart was filled with anger, pain, and despair, and my mind kept going over and over how I had allowed this to happen. I decided not to stand by any longer and do what was long overdue, expose the truth directly. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Emily was already at home, acting as if nothing had happened. She was eating breakfast in the kitchen, dressed in her sports clothes, getting ready for another day at the golf club. I watched her from the living room, trying to understand how she could live a double life so calmly. Her confidence only fueled my anger. That day, I decided to go to the club again, but this time without watching from the car. I wanted to find out what was going on inside and see everything with my own eyes. I arrived an hour after Emily left and used my club membership to get in. Inside, everything looked as calm and luxurious as ever. People were playing, laughing, discussing tactics. I started walking around the grounds looking for her. Everything looked so ordinary that for a moment I doubted my suspicions. But as I approached the training ground, I saw them together. Alex was leaning over her, helping her with a shot. She was laughing, and his hands were on her shoulders longer than necessary. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my head, but I restrained myself and stepped back to think about what to do next. I decided to find proof of their actions that could not leave any room for doubt. I headed to the administrative part of the club, knowing that many upscale places have cameras installed. I asked the administrator to show me the camera footage, explaining that I had lost a valuable item and wanted to understand where exactly I could have left it. They reluctantly agreed. On the footage, I saw them leaving the court and heading to the locker rooms. Their behavior was not just friendly, it was filled with intimacy that left no doubt. I thanked the administrator and left without revealing my true motives. When I returned to the locker rooms, I knew that's where I would find her. When I opened the door to the shower area, I saw something that could no longer be denied. Emily and Alex were there together, their laughter filling the room. My emotions took over. I flew inside, and when they saw me, their faces froze in shock. I don't remember what happened next. Anger clouded my consciousness. I grabbed Alex by the shirt and pushed him against the wall. He was trying to say something, but I couldn't hear him. Emily stood next to me, trying to intervene, but I pushed her away. The whole scene was so humiliating and painful that I could not stay there any longer. I left, leaving them in the shower. In the parking lot, Emily caught up with me and begged me to talk. I couldn't listen to her. Her words sounded empty, like noise. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing in the middle of the parking lot. At home, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to break down. I screamed, threw things, trying to throw out all the anger and frustration that had accumulated inside. But it didn't help. The pain remained. I realized that this day was the end of our marriage. I did not know what would happen next, but I knew for sure that I could not forgive her for what had happened. After that day, when I saw everything with my own eyes, my life turned into chaos. Her betrayal in the golf club shower was the final blow after which I could no longer hold myself together. My trust had been shattered, and all our years together now seemed fake. I returned home devastated, but with the clear realization that things could not go on like this. When I arrived home, I no longer had the strength to even be angry. All my anger had turned into cold, sharp disappointment. I sat in the living room without turning on the light, just listening to the silence. Hours passed, and I couldn't bring myself to get up or do anything. My head was empty, and my heart was heavy as a stone. Emily came back late at night. I heard the door open and her enter the house, her steps cautious, as if she was afraid to face me again. She went into the bedroom without even trying to speak. That silence was worse than any words. She knew what I had seen and didn't have the courage to face me. The next morning, I woke up with a firm intention to act. I needed to take a step forward, even if it meant leaving behind everything we had built together. I started packing my things. Every item, everything I put in my suitcase was a reminder of our years together. But instead of nostalgia, I felt only pain. While I was packing, I began to look through all the evidence of her infidelity that I had collected over the past weeks. Screenshots of messages, photos, even camera recordings, all of it was in front of me like a map of a broken marriage. I decided to keep copies of all this evidence in case I needed to use it in the future. I didn't want Emily to have the opportunity to refute what had happened. When I left the house with my suitcase, she was sitting in the kitchen. Her eyes were blank, but I could see a tinge of fear in them. She realized that it was not just a quarrel, but something more. She did not try to stop me, and this silence was the last confirmation that there was nothing between us anymore. I checked into a hotel nearby to have time to think and decide how to proceed. I started consulting a lawyer to find out about my rights and options. The process of divorce seemed inevitable, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't what I wanted. Deep inside, I still hoped that Emily would recognize her mistakes and try to fix things. In the following days, I started receiving messages from her. She wrote long texts explaining how sorry she was for what happened, how confused she was about her feelings, and how she wanted to fix everything. She offered to meet, talk, and try to find a solution. But every word she said sounded hollow to me. I could no longer believe her. I avoided any contact, concentrating on my own recovery. I started spending more time at work to distract myself. My colleagues noticed that I became more withdrawn, but no one dared to ask what was wrong. I went to the gym, trying to get rid of the accumulated stress. I even started keeping a diary where I wrote down my thoughts and emotions. It was hard but necessary. One day, I received a call from her coach, Alex. His voice was shaky but full of determination. He said he wanted to apologize for everything that had happened and assured me that there was nothing more between them. His words did not calm me down, but only fueled my anger. I didn't answer and just hung up. Weeks passed, and I started to feel like I could move on. I filed for divorce, and it was one of the hardest decisions of my life. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Emily tried to convince me to change my mind, but her efforts were in vain. I could no longer build a future on ruins. The end of this stage of my life was bitter, but it also gave me the opportunity to find a new beginning. I left behind my home, memories, and pain to start from scratch. It was a long and difficult journey, but I knew I could do it. When the divorce was officially finalized, I had mixed emotions. On the one hand, it was a relief. I was no longer tied to the betrayal that was dragging me down. On the other hand, it was an emptiness. The marriage that had once been the foundation of my life no longer existed. Our plans, our memories, all of that was now just a thing of the past. I decided to change my life drastically, starting with a move. I rented a small apartment in another part of the city. It was a quiet place, overlooking a park where I could find peace. My new home was devoid of old memories, and it became a symbol of a new beginning for me. In the first weeks after the divorce, I felt lost. The morning started with a hard climb as I tried to find some motivation to start the day. I spent a lot of time alone, looking through old photos, reading the diary I started keeping during the crisis. Every entry in it was a reflection of my feelings: anger, pain, doubt. But in those lines, I also found hints of my strength that I hadn't noticed before. One day, I decided to return to active life. My work has always been my passion, and now I decided to plunge into it with renewed vigor. I proposed several projects that I had wanted to implement for a long time and started working on them with enthusiasm. Work has become a lifeline for me, helping me to escape from painful thoughts. I also decided to take up sports. Golf, which I used to associate with betrayal, has now become a symbol of overcoming. I joined a different club where there were no faces that reminded me of the past. The game helped me find balance and focus on the positive. I spent hours on the field, enjoying the silence and nature. Over time, I began to open up to people. At first, it was meetings with colleagues who supported me throughout the divorce process. They didn't ask a lot of questions, they were just there for me, and that was enough. Then I started to communicate more with friends I hadn't seen for a long time. They reminded me that life goes on, even after the hardest moments. Traveling became especially important to me. I decided to see the places I had always wanted to visit, but never found the time to do so. I went on short trips to national parks, where I walked along mountain trails and admired the scenery. These were the moments when I felt part of something bigger than my own pain. Nature healed me, giving me a sense of peace and harmony. Once, while walking in the park, I met a woman walking her dog. Her name was Sarah. Her friendliness and sincerity immediately caught my attention. We started talking, exchanged contacts, and agreed to have coffee. This meeting was the first step for me to open up to someone else again. Our conversations with Sarah were simple and relaxed. She didn't ask about my past, but I wanted to share. Her reaction was full of understanding and support. She told me about her own struggles, and it created a connection between us that I hadn't felt in a long time. Gradually, I began to realize that life after betrayal was possible. It didn't mean that the pain had completely disappeared, but I no longer allowed it to define my everyday. I realized that I had a right to happiness, even after such a difficult experience. My recovery was not linear. There were days when the memories of Emily and her betrayal would wash over me with a wave of pain. But now I knew how to deal with it. I focused on the future, on the opportunities that were opening up before me. Every new day was a reminder that I was stronger than I thought. The end of this chapter of my life was the beginning of a new one. I was no longer holding on to the past, but began to look forward with hope and determination. My heart was still healing, but now I knew that I could open myself up to new happiness. And that was the most important thing. A few months had passed since my life had been turned upside down. Emily's betrayal was no longer the center of my thoughts. Although the memories of that period were still painful, I began to see them as lessons that helped me understand who I was and what I wanted out of life. My new rhythm of life was simple, yet intense. I spent more time alone with myself and learned to find joy in small things. Waking up early, I enjoyed walking in the park, where the dawn painted the sky in all shades of pink and gold. The silence of this time helped me to focus and find peace within myself. Sarah, whom I met during one of these morning walks, became an important part of my life. Her presence was unobtrusive but deeply valuable. We talked a lot about the future, sharing our thoughts on the importance of living in the moment and letting go of the past. Sarah had an amazing ability to find the light even in the darkest corners of life, and it inspired me. My business also underwent a change. I realized that the long hours I used to spend at work were a way to avoid personal problems. Now I started delegating more tasks to my team to free up time for things that I really enjoyed. I started attending seminars that I had been interested in for a long time and even started volunteering. Helping others gave me a sense of significance and fulfillment. One day, I received a letter from Emily. It was an unexpected gesture that made me stop and think. In the letter, she thanked me for the years we had spent together and apologized for the pain she had caused. She wrote that she regretted her mistakes, but at the same time realized that we both needed to change. Her words did not make me angry or hurt, but only quiet sadness. I realized that I was finally able to let her go. Thanks to these changes, I began to see my life as a story made up of chapters. The chapter with Emily was important, but it was over, and now it was time to write a new one. This new chapter was full of possibilities. I decided to try something I hadn't had the courage to do before. I signed up for the scuba diving course I had been dreaming about for a long time, and even started planning a trip to Iceland to see the Northern Lights. All these steps were important, but the most important thing was that I felt alive. I no longer let the past hold me captive. My heart, although not yet fully healed, was ready for new love, new friendships, and new challenges. Sarah became not just a friend, but a person who helped me realize that betrayal is not the end, but the beginning of another path. Her kindness and wisdom were like a gentle wind pushing the sail of a ship in the right direction. We started spending more time together, and those moments were filled with sincerity and lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Life after betrayal is a journey that is never easy, but every step makes you stronger. Every day gives you new opportunities. I no longer regret what happened. On the contrary, I am grateful for the experience that helped me realize that true happiness comes when you learn to love and accept yourself. My new horizon was full of light. I was no longer looking back, but moving forward with confidence, knowing that the best days were yet to come.